Welcome to this week's edition of the Redemption Recap. My name's Stephen. I am your host, and today I am joined by Kayla. There she is. We're so excited that you're here. Thanks for stopping by.
Welcome to the Redemption Recap, reminding you of what is happening here at Redemption. Here is today's episode.
So this week we are in week 6 of our Romans 8 series. We were talking about hope, but before we dive into that, we had another great holiday weekend here at Redemption Church.
So good.
How was your 4th of July, Kayla?
It was so fun. Went kayaking, spent a lot of time with friends and family.
On the Maumee River?
No, on the Auglaize River.
That's not a real place.
It is. It's just over by me, over in Archibald Land, Defiance Land.
Auglaize? Auglaize? Ogles?
Auglaize.
Okay.
You weren't close
it was
either
Spanish.
time.
Wow.
It was great.
Okay.
What about
cool.
you guys?
That's fun. Kayaking's great. Yeah, we did. We had a good time. We went to fireworks, or as August calls them the boom booms.
Love that.
So we did a lot of the boom booms.
He got that from you?
He did. That's the only words that come out of my mouth when I see that. I just go boom, boom. Yeah. And so he picked up on that.
Nice.
No, it was good. We celebrated America. I wore my Trump shirt.
You tied a flag around your neck?
I did tie a flag around my neck and ran a lot.
Yeah.
But I was nervous that it was going to touch the ground, and I was like, I don't know what the rules are in this because it's like kind of like a cape, but it looks like a flag, and I don't know if that counts.
Yeah.
There was somebody else at our church who hung, get this, a 600 square foot flag.
What?
Yeah.
From what? Where?
I mean, I don't know where they got it, but
okay.
It's almost as big as my first house. 600 square foot flag. So anyway, that's impressive.
That is impressive.
Yeah, so that was 4th of July. Let's see, yesterday at church we talked about a couple of things. The partnership track is kicking off.
It is.
This week.
This coming Sunday.
Give your pitch.
Okay. If you are new around here and you're looking to get more connected, or you've been here for a while and you're just looking to figure out how to serve or get in a life group or a Bible study, you can join us for the partnership track. It's a 7-week class. We talk about things like our vision, our values, our core doctrine. We get into like how you spiritually grow, how we as a church are going to partner with you to help with that spiritual growth. We get into connecting relationally, serving purposefully, giving generously, and sharing intentionally. It's a really good time. I love it when these classes start up. I think it's going to be a really fun group of people. And it makes it really easy to make new friends. Sometimes it's hard when you're in the sanctuary and you're surrounded by like 300, 400 people to kind of have intentional conversation. And this makes it really easy to get to know some people. So would love to have you. You can sign up online, or you can email me, Kayla@experienceredemption.com.
Excellent. So sign up for that if you're new or newish to Redemption. Starts this Sunday during the 9 o'clock service. We'll watch your kids for both the 9 and the 10:45, and that'll help you get connected. We want to be good at helping people get connected around here. So this is one of the easiest ways to do that. A couple of things also going on at Redemption. We've got, what do we have? Camp. Student camp. You're going.
I am.
So next week.
Next week we leave for camp. We'll be gone, I think, Tuesday through Friday.
And how many students are going?
There's like 30 plus.
Fantastic.
32, 33. Yeah.
Camp is great.
It's going to be so fun. I'm excited about it. Cool. I feel like I'm a kid again.
Right.
I loved camp growing up. So
Did you?
This is going to be good.
I only went to camp once. I was in 7th grade when I went to camp, and I never went in high school because I never wanted to miss like my 1 week of sports. I was too committed to my sports to go to camp. I know.
We are not the same.
Short-sighted.
We are
not the same.
I said rock walls, I'll be there.
Yeah.
Lakes, tubing,
right.
I'm in.
I liked my rhythm.
Yeah.
My summer rhythm, and I didn't want it to get disrupted by camp. But I did go in 7th grade. That's actually like one of like the first or earliest places I remember like giving my life to Christ was at camp, which is why later now I'm like, everyone needs to go to camp.
Yeah.
Kids need to go to camp. So next year, get your student to camp if they're not going to camp this year. And then the week after that, we have church week.
Yes.
Yes, we do.
It's going to be so good.
It is.
Who's coming to talk?
So it's 4 days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, starting the week of July 20th or 21st, one of those dates. And I'm doing Monday night. Jamie Bambrick, who is the editor-in-chief of Clear Truth Media, the guy who made the He Saves Us video, is teaching on Tuesday night. I'm sorry, he's teaching on Wednesday night.
Yeah.
And then Jared Moore, who wrote the book Lust of the Flesh, he's a pastor down in Tennessee that I've become friends with over the last couple of months. He's going to be preaching on Tuesday night, and then I'm going to wrap it up on Thursday night, and we'll do baptisms as well. We'll have some worship, communion, prayer, all of those things every night. There's kid care up to, I think, preschool. And then your elementary kids, just bring them on. Bring them on in.
Yeah.
Cool. So that's what's going on here at Redemption. Today we're going to take a kind of a deeper dive into hope and some of the things that we looked at yesterday, because we're in this series. And Kayla, move your microphone closer. Jordan was trying to be
Got
really
it.
discreet about it.
I said, I
And
can't
I
see you.
appreciate it. And I know the crowd out there was enjoying the fact that they couldn't hear you, but it's... I'm just kidding. Guys, if you knew the abuse I take off air from Kayla.
Guys, if you want to vote in the comments below
Let's do
about
that.
who you think is more of a problem in this
Wow.
duo, just go ahead, place your vote below. I think we all know.
If you don't vote, I know what you mean. Okay? You don't want to offend Kayla. So let's talk a little bit more about hope.
Yes.
Okay, because yesterday I gave a definition for hope.
You did.
And here I'll just read the definition. Hope is a deep conviction in the nature and the character of God that produces the trust that at the appointed time God will establish his perfect kingdom.
Yes.
There we go. That was our definition. So yesterday, as I was preaching through this passage and this text and thinking about hope, what were some of your early thoughts? What was running through your mind?
I really enjoyed it coming off of the week before, right? Because we spent
Yep.
the week before digging into suffering, digging into making sure we're not staying stuck, that we're not
Yep.
walking into being victims. And I feel like we spent a lot of time talking through that. So then it was nice to kind of pull out of that and talk about like, okay, what is the hope
upside.
to come? Yeah, the upside
Yeah.
of it. What is the hope to come? How do we find this hope? Because I think a lot of times in church culture, at least, we'll say you have to have hope, or people will want to like be encouraging and say like, but there is hope. And I think sometimes it feels like this elusive thing that you can't quite grasp
Yep.
when you're in the middle of suffering. So it was nice that we kind of dug into what is hope? How do we arrive at hope? What is the basis for hope? And kind of defining that, because the world's version of hope versus the Bible's version of hope, or God's version of hope, very different things.
Yeah. So what are some of those differences? How would you differentiate those things when you think about, again, like our normal understanding of hope and then the word, the Bible's?
Yeah, I think that like secular hope, if we want to call it that,
Sure.
or the world's version of hope, is often tied to like just our desire for a moment. Like
Okay.
it's this like almost like our wants
Yeah.
are like our future hopes.
Mm-hmm.
And it isn't always tied to like a biblical basis. It's just like, I think I'd be happy if this happened.
Yep.
And even the definition of happy is what we're really saying is like the least abrasive, or like the
Yeah.
easiest path
The lowest
possible,
amount of
the
friction
lowest
in my
amount of
life.
friction.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like that tends to be what our hope is. Like whatever is going to bring the least amount of like friction against me, while the world's hope, or while the Bible's hope is kind of saying there's going to be friction, and because of that, you can then cling to this assurance.
Yeah.
And like that's kind of the difference between the two.
Yeah, and I think what Paul is getting at here in Romans, and again, this is why you have to like look at these chapters verse by verse, because I think if you miss the connections moving through it, then you miss a lot of the depth.
Yeah.
That Paul is trying to give us a hope that is deeper.
Yeah.
And so that's why I spent a lot of time yesterday trying to give some depth or meaning to this word.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of times you hear people use Christian words: hope, faith, love, joy. You could fill in the blank with these words, and they lose their meaning.
Yeah.
Because we've read them so much, we've talked about them so much, somebody has told us over and over we have to have these things, and we don't know what they are. One of the things, as you were talking about, like the worldly understanding of hope, that I've always thought about is it can reveal the shallowness of what's going on in your soul.
Yeah.
When you think about what you are hoping in right now.
Yeah.
And I think it's a fair and honest evaluation for us to go, wow, what triggers like a sense of peace, a sense of joy, a sense of comfort in me.
Yeah.
And if it's something that is really that temporal, then that's a good indicator that I have placed my hope in that thing.
Yep.
And you were pointing out a verse in, I think it was Psalm 42,
Yeah.
that talks about like hope in the Lord from this time forevermore, and that our tendency is often to create these false hopes.
Yep.
Right?
And it's almost like it's almost revealing the thing that we think is going to satisfy us.
Yeah, or save us at an even deeper level.
Yeah, and so it's like, oh, I'll be satisfied if this thing happens, rather than like reading through the definition of hope that you gave on Sunday, that like it's the coming of his eternal kingdom, right? Like that there's this assurance that this is coming. And is our hope actually in that? Are we functioning from an eternal perspective? Or are we like looking for something right in front of us that's really just earthly or temporal to try and satisfy us?
Yeah.
And if that's the case, it could bring like a momentary satisfaction, but in terms of like you staying in a place of satisfaction, it will not provide that.
Well, and I think the potential danger then of this is you can spend your whole life hope jumping or hope hopping, right? And you go from hope to hope to hope to hope, and only to find that every time you get there, it's not enough. And the scriptures often, I think of the Ephesians passage, it talks about one hope, right? So as Christians, we should not be hope hoppers. Because we don't need to. Our hope is eternal. It's not going anywhere. And it is the kind of hope that can anchor us in the midst of the craziness. Right? Now, on the other hand, I'll say this, that like we do serve a God who has created us and wired us in a certain way. And so I think there are other things that God does put in our life that can like almost like hold us over into new seasons. And I think one of the things that's interesting that we have to learn is like how not to negate the beauty of what it is that God has given us in this life, but not to make those things our deepest hope.
Yeah, you've even talked before about how like during difficult seasons, you had a specific season of your life where you played Catan, was it?
Yes.
Like every single evening. And it was this thing that like God had provided you these friendships that like allowed you to not feel alone, allowed you to feel like you were walking through life with people. And so like we're not negating the fact that like
we need people.
We need people.
Things.
God does give us good gifts in the season. It's just that like your hope in that season isn't those friends. You're just recognizing that like God gave you a beautiful gift in order to like walk through this life with.
Yeah, and when you often don't realize that your deepest hope was in that thing until it's taken from you. And then all of a sudden you don't go from, there's an author I used to read who would say there's a difference between being like hurt and being crushed. And when something crushes you, then you've given it a weight that it's not supposed to have. And so if the loss of something crushes you, then it was probably that your deepest hope was in that thing.
And it ties back too to the idea that like all of God's gifts, we hold them with open hands, right? Because they might just be there for a season. And so if you are squeezing onto it, you're unwilling to let it go. You're unwilling to, I don't want to say like sacrifice it if God tells you to move on, but if he's calling you in obedience to something else and you can't let go of the thing you were given for that season, you were probably putting too much stake in that thing.
Yeah, and that's a great way of putting it. That if your grasp on it has to get so tight that if you thought, if I lose this, what now do I have? Well, that's another good indicator that was probably your deepest hope. So yesterday, another thing that I was trying to do was to show the progression of the Christian life. And that happened mostly, we looked at that Titus passage. And it talks about how you moved from grace to sanctification, which I heard was actually spelled Santification. It was. So shout out to Izzy. Or unless she just was copying my notes and then it was my fault. So, but when I thought of sanctification, I thought of the movie, what is the Tim Allen Christmas movie? It's the Santa Claus. The Santa Claus. Right. And they talk about the sanctification process, which is different. It's different to become like Santa than it is to become like Christ.
Yes.
That
is correct.
We agree?
We do agree. Wow.
Okay, good. Yes. And for everyone out there who was wondering, they're different people. That's
they
why.
are.
Yeah.
You're saying Santa and Christ?
And Christ, yes. They're very different. Very different. Yes. So I'm glad we covered this.
Me too.
Okay. So anyway, join us next week.
Just going deeper.
Join us, going deeper here at Redemption Church, clarifying the differences between Santa and Christ. Okay. So grace gives way to sanctification, which is just a fancy word for spiritual growth and transformation, which gives way to, what did I say next? Grace, sanctification, or I'm missing
love is in there.
Love is at the end. I'm missing the third one. Hold on, let me look at my notes. Grace, sanctification. Oh, it was grace. Sorry, faith.
Faith.
Salvation.
Yes.
That's important.
Yes.
You can't be sanctified without your salvation.
Correct.
Grace, salvation, sanctification
Yep.
gives way to hope.
Yep.
Which connects back to the Roman passage that talks about character producing hope.
Yep.
Right? Okay, then hope gives way to love.
Yeah.
All right. So, yesterday, I wanted to make a case that out of a hopeful heart comes love.
Yeah.
Right? So, how do you see that playing out? And how is that, how is that activated in us?
I know we were talking even just earlier on today about how oftentimes someone who is like sitting in a place of hope is more kind in their interactions.
Yeah,
They're like maybe a little bit more intentional in the way that they approach things. Even the idea of they have a little bit more to give. But some of that I feel like ties back to the idea of like what's filling your cup, which goes back to your character, right? And so like, are you able to give out of like an overflow, or are you like at the bottom of the barrel and there's not much left? And when you're at the bottom of the barrel, our first reaction doesn't always tend to be love. It tends to be like frustration or anxiety or whatever it ends up being. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think we're operating out of the deepest place of our heart, like the recesses of our heart.
Yep.
Did I share the Catan story with you last week? I don't want to repeat myself on this. Does that not
I don't
sound
think
familiar?
you did.
Okay, so here's something I noticed about myself.
Okay.
I do play a lot of Catan. I used to play a lot of Catan. We don't
Yeah.
play as much anymore. But, and I noticed that as a competitive person, when I would be playing, if I was losing, I would just generally not be as nice to be around at the table. Okay? And then when I would begin to win again, which was inevitable.
Yeah.
But when I would
Which was inevitable, and I agreed, and I hated
you did
that.
so like seamlessly. They're like, why would you ever lose?
I
at
hate that I just
Catan?
did that.
I know, that was great. So when I would begin to win again, I would like get happier.
Yeah.
And at some point in time during this, I kind of learned like, you're too old for this. Like, you're too old to get angry, upset, sad, not be fun at the table.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're losing in this game.
Yeah.
Right? Particularly a game that you basically win every time. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, but at some point, like that changed in me, I
Yeah.
hope, and I got better at this. But here's what I was, but what I learned at some point was applying that out to life.
Yeah.
That when you're in a place where you think you're losing, when it's not going well, when things are tough, it's very natural to not be as fun to be around.
Yep.
To become more self-centered.
Yep.
To think, well, I need to get mine, or I will become joyful again once I've won again, or
Yeah.
I've accomplished this thing or that, or I start comparing myself to other people. I start
Yep.
competing and all of that. I start playing whatever. Okay, so in Christ,
Yep.
we have this hope, this victory
Yep.
of the glory that I think Paul was saying that should never be taken from us.
Yeah.
It can't be taken from us.
Yeah.
So you can operate through all of life,
Yep.
no matter what's happening, with the attitude of you're winning and you're going to win. So
Yeah.
that's the connection I was trying to make between hope and love.
I like that too, because if you think about, like, if I think about how I function in games, I also win quite often.
Yeah.
And
Challenge accepted.
Would love
Next
that.
week's redemption
We play
recap is just
Catan.
us playing Catan. And then everyone out there is betting, but not money, because that's a sin. You and your Santa sin. Okay, continue.
Okay, yes.
Sanctification.
Sanctification.
He probably bets.
How
Pagan.
I feel like a lot of times when you're like playing a game and you're not winning, you'll like start to seclude.
Yeah, you
You'll
isolate.
like you
Yep.
isolate, and it becomes very inward focus. And a lot of times you're like, "Ugh, when is this going to end? I want this game to finish. Like, I want it to just finish out so we
Yeah.
can move on." And oftentimes we end up doing that, and like there are so many negative consequences to isolation when you are like in the midst of a season and you start to feel frustrated by like life's game.
Yeah.
And you like start to isolate yourself or isolate your family or just isolate even within your family, and you're not letting people know what's going on. A lot of times that's when the enemy can speak the most lies, because you're not letting other people speak the truth in that situation. And so that's kind of the point where like the idea of proven character, sometimes that just takes vulnerability. Like, this is where I'm at. I'm starting to isolate. I'm starting to feel frustrated. I'm like beginning to have like a lack of patience, and letting other people into that so that you can not let yourself be kind of withdrawn and letting people speak truth.
Are there like early signs for you, like alarms that start going off when you know that you're starting to isolate yourself?
I think so. I think that like I don't tend to be an overthinker as a general rule. But if I'm like in a place where like I'm like unhealthy about something, I'll like find myself rethinking it from every single angle humanly possible. And a lot of times when I catch myself in that, I'm like, ooh, okay, I've officially lost perspective on the situation because I've so overthought it that like now I couldn't tell you what the truth perspective is on it. So that's like normally my first like, okay, how much time am I spending thinking on this?
Yeah.
And if I'm spending like a fair amount of my brain power on it and it's just like me thinking through all the different angles, I'm
like, stop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're done.
Yeah.
Also, I tend to be a talker.
I noticed.
Yes. So if I start withdrawing and like not participating in conversation, that to me starts to be like, ooh, red flag. Like you're no longer like participating with the people around you.
Do you think there's a connection here between the demise of false hopes and then being driven into that kind of isolated despair?
Probably.
Like as you were talking, I was thinking that oftentimes when you think about losing the game of life, it's because you thought you were on a path to win.
Yeah.
And, you know, whether it's a board game or life, we all have a strategy, you know, a game plan for what we think is going to be best for us.
Yeah.
And so we all lay that plan out. And if it doesn't go to plan, it really is the breakdown of a hope.
Yeah.
And so then we feel like, well, I'm not winning the way that I wanted to win. And we don't always compare winning the same way.
Yeah.
Right? Some of us, you know, winning was the relationship you were in or the money you made or whatever.
Yeah.
But when we don't have it, then that's part of what pulls us in. So you could even look at what Paul is saying here as like there's almost like the circular angle to it, that if I place myself in a false hope, and if I don't get it, it's going to drive me even deeper into despair. I'm going to love less. I'm going to be isolated less. Now I'm going to have to create another false hope in order to get me out of that, because we naturally look for hope when we're in a broken spot. And whether it's the real hope or the fake ones. And then the difficulty is when we obtain the fake ones even. We realize, well, that was Paul's second point. It doesn't last. Like, so even if you get it, it's transient.
Yeah. And I know that you had mentioned yesterday too about how oftentimes in our like false hope searching, right? We'll do this like self-medicating thing. Like we'll fill our time with certain things that we think are going to satisfy in the moment. We like self-medicate ourselves. And how a lot of times doing that, so like your false hope, it doesn't come to pass the way that you wanted it to. You start self-medicating. Well, a natural outpouring of that is, okay, now I've taken myself out of the sanctification cycle because I'm going to start making excuses for why I'm doing this, which ties back into like our checks that we said last week on the redemption recap. Like, am I being an image bearer of Christ? Am I still partnering for the gospel?
Or if I take in a victim mentality. Yeah, that's interesting, because now what you're trying to do is that line that we talked about yesterday and I've mentioned here, right? The grace, salvation, sanctification, hope, love. We're trying to pull hope out of that line. And we have grace and faith and salvation and sanctification, all those things up here. But we want our hope to like come from somewhere else. Right? And hope over twice in the scriptures, we pointed out, it comes out of sanctification. It comes out of character. And hope, then I think you could say, hope that doesn't come out of sanctification is going to be a false hope. And not only is it going to be a false hope, but then it has the tendency, whether it is to isolate ourselves or to then, I would say, even drive us into a worse character, right? You could look at the reverse of that Romans passage where it says character produces hope, and you could say, well, false hope produces bad character. Because then when I fail, now I have to medicate. Right? Okay, but Paul said the antidote to that is waiting patiently. I like, I know that you had mentioned the Psalms 42 scripture that we were talking about earlier, and I know everyone has some different versions, but the version that some of us have the right one.
The version that I have, at the end of verse 5 in Psalms 42, it says, "Hope in God, for I shall praise him again for the help of his presence." And that idea of like his presence being the thing that is like anchoring in the midst of that, like, I'll hope again because he's here, he is near, and like his presence is close by.
Yeah. It doesn't go anywhere.
It doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah. Okay, so let's hop back to the idea of waiting patiently.
Yeah.
So yesterday I gave a definition of patience.
Yeah.
It was a commitment of the will to wait with integrity.
Yeah.
You said there was something about the definition that kind of grabbed you yesterday. What was it?
Yeah. I just like the idea of, I think that I had never defined patience before.
Yeah,
I feel
another
like
one of those words.
It just
We
is
just
another
use
one.
them.
You just
Yeah.
use it all the time. And so like, to me, patience was like, I'm going to have a good attitude while what I want isn't coming in my timing. I
Yeah.
feel like that's how I was defining patience. Like, I'll be in good spirit when I don't like things, like the way things look.
Yeah.
But flipping it to that idea that like, I will be expectant with integrity. I liked the idea of like, specifically the integrity being pulled in there, because the integrity takes out a little bit the attitude of like, it's not what I want, it's not what I planned, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I liked reframing it in my mind like that. Like, I'm not just being kind while I don't like things.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm being a person of integrity while I wait with expectation. And I just liked the like reframing of my mind on that, because I'm
Yeah.
like, how many things that I'm being patient in am I still expectant in? Or
Yeah.
have I like resigned to like, this is what it is right now and who
Yeah.
knows when it will change. So, and that almost in itself loses the hope aspect.
Yeah, because he says we're waiting in our expectation of hope
Yeah.
patiently.
Yeah.
So we're not getting rid of the expectation.
Yep.
Right. We're just waiting patiently, and to wait patiently then is to wait with integrity. There was following the sermon as I was thinking through this, there were two things that came to mind. That oftentimes we will have one of these two things or both present in our waiting, and that is either an inner covetousness, right, or outward medication, self-medication.
Yeah.
Right. So that would look like, you know, I mentioned I think a couple of this, but like if you're desiring to get married, right, not waiting in patience is, you know, sexual promiscuity from now until marriage,
Yeah.
right? You're like, well, I'm going to medicate it, you know, with doing whatever I want until that moment.
Yeah.
Or if you're like, well, I'm disciplined in that area, but I'm going to go do all this other crazy stuff,
Yeah.
right? And it's self-medication. Or another way that you can lack patience is an inner covetousness. And so like I noticed this, and like when I got into my late 20s, I started getting bitter towards everybody that was married, right? So every time I got invited to a wedding, not every time I got married, I only got married once, just to clarify, Santification. So whenever I would get invited to a wedding, I'd get mad. Right, and that was not, obviously I was not waiting patiently.
Yeah.
Because there wasn't necessarily an external action, but
Yeah.
there was an inner covetousness.
Yeah.
And that's why I think the word integrity always wraps up both the inward and the outward.
Yeah, because it's almost like your inner dialogue
Yeah.
during that season. You like start getting into the like comparison game.
Yeah.
Well, like, why are they getting married first?
Sure.
And why are they having kids first?
Yeah.
Why do they get the house? You know, whatever it ends up being in whatever season of life you're in. And then it almost like bears to jealousy and
Yep.
then bitterness. And then again, even in that, it can isolation. You pull back.
Sure.
You're like,
absolutely. I'm not going to be friends with them.
I'm so glad
Yeah.
that you're living in that blessing, but I'm not right now.
Yeah.
And so like it almost then can ruin your relationships.
Sure.
Yeah.
It was also an indicator though of a false hope.
Yeah.
Right? There was a false hope that like, well, marriage is just going to be this, you know, end all solution to
Yep.
everything.
Yep.
And marriage is great. Love my
Yeah.
wife, all of those things, but it's not an end all solution.
No.
It's part of what God, you know, uses to redeem us and sanctify us and give us a good life. But if it's your deepest hope, it'll crush you. It'll crush, you know, for me, her, for
Yeah.
you, him, right? Like, and because it can't ultimately satisfy. It
Yeah.
can't be the deepest hope.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so often I think maybe something to learn from here too is where there seems to be a lack of either external self-control or internal self-control over your covetousness,
Yeah.
that you might be able to reverse engineer that Say, okay, I'm impatient about this thing
Yeah.
that might reveal where there's a false hope in my life.
Yeah.
If I'm saying to myself, I have to have that right now.
Yeah.
And if I don't have it right now, I'm going to be so mad I'm going to sin about it, either inwardly or outwardly.
Yeah.
Well, then that might be where you've placed
Yeah.
some false hope.
Or even not sin about it, even just that's the area that I'm going to lose my identity in.
Yeah.
Because my identity is now the thing that I want my life to look like when I get this.
Yeah.
And our identity isn't found in the blessings that we're given through this life. Our identity is found in Christ and how we rightly bear his image. So like if that's starting to take away at a certain point, then we need to probably address that.
Yeah, there was an author I used to read that said, if that thing is heaven, then the only alternative is that right now you're living in hell. And so if obtaining that thing, that's it, right? That's the heaven I've been looking for. Well, then what are you living in right now? You will make yourself, your life, a living hell, right? Until you get that thing that will actually never deeply satisfy, right? So it is the deepest of false hopes, right? But instead, Paul says, place yourself in this hope, right? Christ, the glorification of your body, and the new heaven and the new earth that is coming. Well, fascinating conversation as always. If you are not subscribed, please do so on either Spotify or YouTube. If you don't subscribe to our Daily Dig, you can do that at experienceredemption.com. Never miss a Sunday. If you're gone on vacation, you can always watch us online or pick it back up on podcast or watch the full video on YouTube. Thanks for being here, guys, and we'll see you soon.
The Redemption Recap is an extension of Redemption Church. For more information about the church, please visit experienceredemption.com. Thanks for stopping by.